What Australia has built since then is nothing short of incredible, and with such a raw and amazing landscape to create with, there's been a team called Team Oceania, who has been building Australia, New Zealand, and surrounding areas in Minecraft. And today, we're going to take a look at the totality of their accomplishments for the entire 4 years we've been working on planet Earth. This is everything Australia's ever done. Let's start with a glorious skyscraper-laden beachfront property that underlines the glorious tropical climate of Australia, because I've been piss-poor cold my entire life, and I'm tired of it. Gold Coast is a city in Queensland which is originally inhabited by the Yugambeh people. You see, this really interesting thing is going on where around 50,000 years ago, somewhere around there, human beings really started moving around. The Great Migration, you might say. People from Asia went all over the Pacific, including all the way to America through a land bridge that connected Russia to Alaska, first identified by Sarah Palin. People spread out all over and became distinct tribes, from Greenland all the way to the tip of South America. This happened likewise everywhere else, including Australia. Then, about 1,000 years ago, as we started to move into the modern era, the second Great Migration started occurring and essentially collided with the people from the first. This was happening everywhere, including Australia. In Gold City, it has a beach. That beach actually stretches 43 miles long, and in the water, sharks are a real concern. Australia's largest lifeguard organization patrols the beaches here to minimize incidences. Another thing, Australia is wrong, disturbingly wrong. Summer is in January, winter is in August. That means in Christmas, Santa is sweating his ass off in that bulky red suit, trying to get through chimneys in late December with record highs of over 100 degrees inside this narrow space shaped like a tubular oven. This place is a crime against all that is good and decent. They've also built this beautiful villa in Nerang, Queensland. Nerang coming from Yugambeh language meaning small river, respectively. The Yugambeh people originally inhabited this area until they were slaughtered by the native police in the 1850s. And though the villa is currently closed, many Airbnbs are hosted at this location, with the Nerang National Park a short walk away to enjoy a vast forested Australian marvel of nature that hosts a variety of wildlife. Here is the largest city in Australia, Sydney. Sydney ranks 11th in the world for economic prosperity and opportunity, which I found surprising given its competition. There's one thing about Sydney's history that you should know. In 1804, Irish convicts roused a force of 300 rebels to attempt to take over the colony and commandeer ships for any Irish convicts who wished to return to the homeland. Philip Cunningham, the leader of the rebellion, set fire to his house, which was the signal for the rebellion to begin. They sacked the government buildings at Castle Hill and stole all ammunition and arms, then proceeded to ransack the surrounding countryside, getting more supplies, firearms, ammunition, and recruits. The original plan was for almost 700 convicts to combine forces with 1,100 convicts from Hawkesbury, but groups got lost, the raising of recruits in Castle Hill underperformed, and no one from Hawkesbury ever came at all, meaning the rebels were in trouble when faced with the government's approaching force of 400 militia who were much better armed. The rebels got their ass kicked. The force was routed, people died, many captured, the leaders were hanged, many others lynched. They reenacted the event in 2004. Probably not the hangings, but just the battle part. And so history repeats. Epic battles of history with men being men and the men of today cosplaying history. Today, Sydney is over 5 million strong in population and one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. Paired with its immense economic prosperity and opportunity, on display is the Central Business District, home to many skyscrapers and being one of the world's epic finance centers. Another area that's built is the Rockingham suburb in Perth, Australia. Rockingham was a ship in the bay of the area in 1830, which eventually was blown onto the beach and eventually broke up into ruins after failed attempts to get her back out there. The settlers living near the wreck started using the name Rockingham Town in their address, and the rest is history. Team Oceania have specifically built this completed radius around Rockingham Centre, a gigantic mall shopping center that's been a staple in the area for decades. Suburbs, which has over 650,000 square feet of space and 184 tenants/shops. They've also completed a small stretch of the suburban subdivision of Carlton in Melbourne, Australia. Here you can see the builders put painstaking detail on every inch of the area to the point where it looks like some strange, beautiful ice cream Minecraft creation. The giant floating player heads behind the buildings are probably not there in real life. Carlton is known nationwide for its Little Italy area, which is where I think we are, and Carlton has its historic roots from springing up during the Australian Gold Rush. Now let's take a look at Melbourne, the second largest city in Australia and something that has considerable progress. Melbourne in Minecraft has separate substantial islands of progress all over the place that are close enough to be viewed collectively, among them being De Graves and Flinders Street, Melbourne University and central districts of high-rise skyscrapers viewing the bay. The Aboriginal Victorians have occupied this area pre-European settlement, and evidence exists showing habitation as far back as 40,000 years ago. The last ice age was 20,000 years ago, followed by a significant rising of sea levels and flooding. Generational oral history among the tribes describes these sorts of flooding events. Incredible. There was an attempt at Melbourne in 1803, but due to lack of resources, they relocated the settlement to Tasmania, and another attempt in the area wouldn't be made for another 30 years. 30 years later, you have John Batman claiming to have negotiated a purchase of the land with the natives. No one spoke the same language, and it was later disputed, the natives thinking it was just another gift exchange. Decades later, through much civilizational growth and immigration, they declared Melbourne a city. Melbourne then really started to grow when they found gold in Victoria in 1851. Exponential growth to the point where Melbourne overtook Sydney as the most populated city. We went from enthusiastic gold miners living in tents to established suburban grids with mansions in just a few decades. Melbourne's economic expansion here and in the next few decades was unprecedented. We went from nothing in 1830 to the richest city in the world by 1880. This peaked in 1886 when they hosted the Centennial Exhibition and burst a bubble which led to a slight economic depression. The city became the temporary capital during the World War era and continued to expand in the post-war period. Today, it's still f***ing booming, bitch. 34 new skyscrapers from 2010 to 2020, but they were hit the worst during the thing that happened, which shall not be named. And then we've got a nice suburban subsection of Melbourne called St. Kilda, consecrated and started by good old Benjamin Baxter in 1839. This area experienced much of the same history as Greater Melbourne. An interesting tidbit is that they had an amusement ride, Robson's Figure 8, in 1908, and you can see a picture of it. What's fascinating about this is seeing a black and white picture of what looks like a pretty modern roller coaster design with people still using carriages on the roads. St. Kilda had a reputation for loose morals. Team Australia has done an amazing job with the completed progress in this area so far, as well as all of Melbourne. In New Zealand, we have one of the most significant cities called Dunedin, with a bulk of progress involving the first church of Olago built in the 19th century, considered one of the most beautiful churches in the country. But they were so hasty with its construction that the building was opened without seating, and the earliest congregations had to remain standing for the entire durations of the service. This was not the cathedral you see before you, but a quickly erected weatherboard building, replaced by a stone church in 1850, and eventually after the many different incarnations of churches, the cathedral standing before you was built. The larger city of Dunedin that it rests in was the country's largest city until 1900. The Maori occupied the area previously, New Zealand's natives before the European settlers arrived, for hundreds of years. In the 1990s, they were experiencing serious population decline, so they rebranded themselves a heritage city and restructured the streets in a Victorian style. The cluster of completed progress you see here is the Octagon, which originally was a deep gully, completely filled to make this flat plaza in the 19th century. Humans are crazy. Here's an area of completed progress in the New Zealand city of Upper Hutt. This area was originally inhabited by the Maori, and like so many places, in the 1800s, settlers made a deal for land purchase. The natives later felt like they were cheated, and violence escalated into conflict and war. But the Maori were particularly brutal. An example is the Boyd Massacre, in which the Maori ambushed, killed, and 8 70 European crew members of the British brigantine ship. The void, after previously escalated provocations, led to conflict. But unlike the dismal fate of many tribes across the world who were displaced by the modern immigration of the 15th to 19th centuries, the Maori are approximately 20% of the New Zealand population today at 1 million strong, which is huge in comparison to other tribes in America or Pacific territories. But here in Upper Hutt, it's slightly lower at 15%. They've also completed a large portion of the New Zealand Nelson Airport, which services over 1 million passengers a year. An average of 60 commercial flights per day. It is the 6th busiest airport in New Zealand, and you might be asking yourself, why would the team choose the 6th busiest to build? Because airports are f***ing psycho. The largest ones are basically their own large town. Barely any airports in our project have been completed to a degree where you could put it in the ballpark of being complete, and so Oceania set their sights accurately on something that's challenging but also able to be accomplished. And seeing the size of this place, it's just as beautiful as the day I was born there. Let's take a look at the largest city in New Zealand, Auckland. European for the majority of its history, but became multicultural with an influx of Asian immigrants during the 20th century, becoming nearly 30% of its population. The Maori first settled here in 1350, who immigrated from Polynesia. Auckland has been the nation's largest city throughout most of its history, the Minas Tirith, if you will. The introduction of firearms to this area in the early 1800s caused absolute chaos and intertribal warfare. By the 1860s, Auckland was a base against the Maori King movement, a movement within the native population to establish their own monarchical system. Years later, this would lead to the invasion of the Waikato, the largest and most significant event in New Zealand wars between its settlers and the Maori, which also led to the Battle of Rangiroa, in which 1,500 British defeated 500 Maori, being the bloodiest war battle in New Zealand at the time. If you've seen The Last Samurai, a lot of this is sounding familiar. In fact, yes, they made 2 movies about this in the early 20th century, a silent film and then a sound remake in the 40s. So yeah, they lost their land. The government apologized about it 130 years later. Auckland experienced a boom in the 1980s from deregulation, almost like it was a great leap forward. Let's take a look at New Zealand's capital, Wellington. It was declared to be New Zealand's capital just 25 years after it was declared a city, when its population was only 5,000 people. Wellington has fascinating topography and is a port town. It ranks 12th in the world for quality of living. Its ratio to cost of living was also excellent, being only the 139th most expensive city to live in, way down there in comparison to their quality ranking. Tourism injects $1.3 billion annually into the capital, and it's no wonder, having a reputation for being a cool city, known for its coffee and cafe scene and incredible architectural designs. Here's a small town in New Zealand called Kaitaia. Team Oceania has gone absolutely ham on this little town, completing a surprising radius of progress on a town with a population of less than 7,000. Seems to me like they're set on finishing it. When I see something like this, in an area like this, my guess is that someone in Oceania actually lives here. The town was actually started with a religious mission station in 1835. 2 families intermarried during that time to form the beginning of the Pakeha settler community, establishing the basis of Kaitaia. The bowling club of this town caught fire in 2020. This city is one of the main towns of the far north in New Zealand, aptly nicknamed where journeys begin. I say aptly because that's where our journey ends, because that is everything Australia and New Zealand from Team Oceania has ever done. We didn't get to see the Shire. I'm assuming they haven't built it, which makes my heart sad. But you know what? It's probably such a cliche at this point that anyone mentions Lord of the Rings when one of them says they're from New Zealand. I understand that. If you want to explore Middle-earth in Minecraft, we did that in another video. No doubt the contributions Oceania has accomplished so far in building the Earth in Minecraft are amazing, showing us the civilization of the Pacific in a way never before considered. But they need help in expanding and growing these areas. So if you live there, or you LARP pretty hard for Australia, or you want to get down and dirty with a kangaroo, join their Discord to see more and possibly contribute. A huge thanks to our Tier 5 patron Solly. He killed the dingo that ate my baby.